In the frozen landscape of the Ardennes, a brand new, completely untested American infantry division found itself directly in the path of a German Panzer army. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and thrown into a battle they were never supposed to win. But what happened next, at the vital crossroads of St. Vith, was something the German High Command never saw coming. This is the story of an American last stand that defied all the odds and brought the Allies the one thing they desperately needed: time. In early December 1944, the men of the U.S. 106th Infantry Division, nicknamed the Golden Lions, were fresh off the boat in Europe. They were a green division packed with young soldiers who had yet to hear a shot fired in anger. Their first assignment was a stretch of the German-Belgian border known as the Schnee Eifel, a hilly, heavily wooded region considered so quiet that veteran soldiers called it the Ghost Front. The 106th was sent here to get its feet wet, taking over positions from the battle-hardened 2nd Infantry Division. But the handover was a disaster waiting to happen. The division was ordered to cover a 21-mile front, way more than the standard for a unit its size. To make it even worse, they'd moved in without their heavy equipment to avoid tipping off the Germans, expecting to use the gear left by the departing 2nd Division. But the veteran troops, not trusting anyone, took most of their equipment with them. The Golden Lions were left dangerously exposed, stretched thin and badly under-equipped. They were, without knowing it, being set up for a catastrophe. Two of the division's 3 regiments, the 422nd and 423rd, were pushed forward onto the Schnee Eifel Ridge, sticking out into German territory. For a few days, the quiet lived up to its name. The new soldiers got used to their foxholes and the biting cold, thinking they were in a safe place to learn the ropes of war. They had no idea that on the other side of the hill, hidden by the dense trees, German armies were massing for Hitler's last, desperate gamble on the Western Front. At around 5:30 a.m. on December 16, 1944, the Ghost Front exploded. A massive artillery barrage tore through the American lines along an 80-mile front, cutting communication lines and causing chaos among the Green troops. This was the start of the Ardennes counter-offensive, better known as the Battle of the Bulge. The 106th Division was sitting at its absolute epicenter. General Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army slammed right into the 106th's thin line. For the men of the 422nd and 423rd Regiments on the Schnee Eifel, things got desperate almost immediately. German infantry and panzers simply bypassed their main positions, cutting them off from behind. Surrounded with no communications and dwindling supplies, they fought on for 3 days in isolated pockets. But the German numbers were just too overwhelming. On December 19th, with no hope of rescue, the remnants of the 2 regiments were forced to surrender. It was one of the largest mass surrenders in American military history. Nearly 7,000 soldiers of the 106th Division became prisoners of war. In just 72 hours, 2/3 of the division's fighting force was gone. The Schnee Eifel was a disaster, a brutal introduction to war that had shattered the Golden Lions. But the fight wasn't over. The division's last effective unit, the 424th Infantry Regiment, managed to pull back, battered but still intact. They, along with scattered survivors, started falling back toward the most critical spot in the sector, the Belgian town of St. Vith. St. Vith was a small town with immense importance. It was a vital crossroads with 5 major highways and 3 rail lines, a hub the German armored columns had to capture to keep their advance fueled and moving toward the port of Antwerp. The German timetable demanded its capture by the evening of December 17th. Standing in their way were the remnants of the 106th, specifically the 424th Regiment and the division's 81st Engineer Combat Battalion. They were a broken force, but they weren't alone for long. Reinforcements started trickling in, most importantly, Combat Command B of the 7th Armored Division, led by the tough Brigadier General Bruce C. Clarke. When Clarke arrived in the chaotic town, he found the 106th's commander, Major General Alan Jones, in despair. Jones told him, "I've thrown in my last chips." Clarke took charge and started organizing a defense. He scraped together a fighting force from the remnants of the 106th, his own 7th Armored, and elements of the 9th Armored and 28th Infantry divisions. They formed a horseshoe defense around St. Vith, a desperate perimeter of tanks, tank destroyers, and exhausted infantrymen determined to hold the Crossroads no matter what. Starting on December 17th, this collection of battered units stood against parts of what were estimated to be 8 German divisions, including elite SS Panzer units. The battle was a brutal, swirling mess. American tank destroyers laid in ambush, knocking out Panzers at close range. Engineers fought as infantry, using rifles and explosives to defend the town. The men of the 424th, who had just escaped the disaster on the Schnee Eifel, now found themselves in another relentless fight for survival. For 5 grueling days, they held. While the main defense was raging at St. Vith, another, even more desperate last stand was happening a few miles away. At a windswept crossroads called Baraque de Fraiture, a tiny force of Americans made a stand that became legendary. On December 19th, about 100 survivors from the 106th Division's 589th Field Artillery Battalion, led by Major Arthur C. Parker III, arrived at the crossroads with just 3 105-meter howitzers left. Parker knew this intersection was a critical artery for the German advance. He gathered a small mixed group that grew to about 300 men, stragglers from different units, a few glider infantrymen, and a recon platoon. For 4 days, this tiny, cobbled-together force held the crossroads against the spearhead of the elite 2nd SS Panzer Division. They were ridiculously outnumbered and outgunned, facing down panzers with little more than 3 cannons and sheer determination. The defense was so fierce it was nicknamed the Alamo defense. The howitzers fired directly at the advancing tanks, point blank. When German infantry assaulted, the Americans met them with machine guns and rifles. The fight was so ferocious that German commanders later described it as one of the most violent and toughest battles they experienced. On December 23rd, with nearly half its defenders killed or wounded, and Parker himself unconscious, the position was finally overrun. But their incredible sacrifice had bought 4 precious days, further stalling the powerful German armored assault. These stories of raw courage against impossible odds are what define military history. The stands at St. Vith and Baraque de Fraiture are monuments to the spirit of the common soldier. If you want to hear more stories of incredible last stands and forgotten battles, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments what other pivotal battles you think deserve to be remembered. Back at St. Vith, by the night of December 21st, the defenders were about to be completely encircled. Their supplies were gone, and General Clarke was given the order to withdraw. But this was no panicked retreat. Under the cover of darkness, the defenders pulled back in an orderly fashion, having held the vital crossroads for 5 days longer than the Germans had planned. The impact of this stand was enormous. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army, later admitted that the stubborn defense at St. Vith completely wrecked his timetable. He had expected to be miles beyond the town, racing for the Meuse River. Instead, his entire corps was held up. His supply lines were snarled, and the critical element of surprise was lost. The ferocity of the defense was so great that Manteuffel mistakenly believed he was facing a full American corps, not a cobbled-together group of survivors. The delay gave the Allies critical time to form a new defensive line and ultimately doomed Hitler's last great offensive. The 106th Infantry Division entered the Battle of the Bulge as a green unit and suffered one of the worst disasters in U.S. Army history. But its remnants refused to break. The soldiers of the 424th Regiment and the 589th Field Artillery Battalion, forged in the fires of St. Vith and Baraque de Fraiture, fought on. The division itself was rebuilt in January 1945 and continued to fight until the war ended. They paid a horrific price, with over 8,000 casualties, most of them taken prisoner. But in their defiance, they gave the Allies the priceless gift of time, proving that even in the face of catastrophe, unbelievable courage could change the course of a war. This is History Replay. This day.